We'd also like to acknowledge the D Word, who is live blogging today. If you aren't already a member of that platform, you should definitely join. It's an amazing resource.
Thank you, Emma. Thank Emma.
Hi.
These people do very hard work back there. Yes.
Hello.
Tip your waiters.
All right, I like this.
I'm, as you might have mentioned, I'm Philip Shane, and this is Dan Taberski.
Hi.
And it's interesting, I like the name, Headlong, and Headlong is the name of your company, is that right?
Headlong is the name of the anthology series.
The series.
Yes, exactly. So I have, basically, it's the overall sort of rubric with which I do my podcast. And the first podcast was Missing Richard Simmons, which came out in 2017. And that was an exploration about the disappearance, in quotes, of the exercise guru Richard Simmons and trying to understand what happened there.
I still, when I mention to people who haven't heard of it, it's
Yeah.
like, he's missing? And I was like, you got to check
He's
out
not
the-
missing. I know, it's hard. He's not really missing. He exists. He's alive. But he was one of the most public. If you don't know, I'm just going to explain things like you've never seen it and you don't know anything. He was one of the most public celebrities ever. And he used to teach a fitness class in Beverly Hills for 40 years, $12 a class. You could take it. I took the class for a year. For a year, yeah. I lost a couple pounds. And in an effort to try to get him to do a documentary, we were talking about it. He would wake up in the morning and call people 3, 4, like 10 and 20, 30 people a day who lived in the middle of nowhere, who needed help and empathy because they weighed 500 pounds and couldn't lose weight without him. And he would do this for free. And he stopped all of that on a dime on a day and cut off all friends and family. And so the podcast was an exploration of trying to understand why.
Yeah. Well, and tell you, we'll play that a clip in a second.
Yeah.
Was that your first podcast?
That was the first podcast I ever did. It was supposed to be a film. It started out as a documentary film. When Richard had cut everybody off, I thought, well, that's it, because you can't do a documentary about somebody if they don't want to participate. It doesn't make any sense. But then I realized people started approaching me because I knew people in that world, because now I knew all the people who was taking his class with. They started approaching me saying that they were concerned, that they didn't understand why he had done that there were rumors that he was being held against his will. There were rumors that he was suicidal. There was a lot of bad things being said, and people who loved him and that he had built lifelong friendships with and professional relationships with had real concerns. And so I realized that nobody was talking about the story that I thought was really important, and so I just started shooting it as a film. I was shooting it on my iPhone. I bought a professional audio gear, but I was doing the video on my iPhone because I saw the movie Tangerine, and I was like, if he could do it, I could do it.
Yeah. It gave us all permission.
Yeah. That movie, I love that movie. I watch it every once in a while again, just because it's so good. I was just making it. I was interviewing people, trying to figure out what was going on, and then I ran into some old friends who I'd worked with over the years, who were now working at Topic Studios, and I mentioned it.
What studios?
Topic Studios.
Topic Studios.
Yeah, back then it was called First Look Media.
Oh yeah.
And I told them about it, not thinking that they would be interested, and they said, "Oh, it sounds like a podcast." So they funded it, and that was right after Serial had come out. So they funded that to me to develop it as a podcast and a documentary at the same time.
Was that the first podcast they had done?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And what year was that?
We started working together in 2016,
Okay.
and it came out in 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big watershed in the whole podcasting world. That these companies are coming in now and interested in making podcasts.
Yeah,
they would have made films.
Yes, exactly. The fact that they were steering me towards a podcast was really interesting. And at that point, in 2016, it's only 3 years ago, but it's a different world completely in terms of podcasting. it was completely experimental. People didn't really understand how you make money on it. People were thinking more about it as IP, right? They were thinking it's sort of a way to develop an idea in an inexpensive way and see if it is worth making on a larger scale in film or television. That was sort of the model, I think, at the time. But that's changed a little bit.
And we're going to play a clip in a second. And is this, how many people worked on this, on the Missing Richard Simmons podcast? Was it just you alone, or did they give you a team, or did you?
Oh yeah, so Topic funded it, and Pineapple Street Media is the studio that made it with me. So they produced it with me, and so I had a producer. I had two producers. One of whom appears in the podcast with me very often, sort of my partner in crime, named Henry. And then I had an associate producer. I had an editor, not like a movie editor, an editor like a magazine editor who would sort of read my writing and listen to my work and tell me what I was doing wrong and all that stuff. So I had a team. I mean, it's not, people think podcast equals cheap. And as far as podcasts go, this was not a cheap podcast. None of the ones I make are cheap. And it's not.
That's his pitch. That's his pitch.
Yeah. And it's not because I'm getting all the money. They're very time consuming. They're it's like making a film. It takes months and months and months and months, and a lot of manpower. But yeah.
Yeah, right on. Well, let's listen to an example from Missing Richard Simmons. Do you want to set it up?
Let me set it up a little bit. So basically, this is a woman named Kathy from Nebraska, and it is, the reason I like this clip is it's kind of an interesting example of how very often in a podcast or a documentary film, people are trying to tell a story, and they're using the interviews to fill in parts of that story. And I think this was a really interesting example of how she gave me insight that I would never have gotten. I didn't know. She gave me insight that I never would have gotten otherwise. And she sort of led me in other directions towards the motivations of what might be making Richard Simmons do what he had done, in a really beautiful way, I think.
Yeah. I'll play that clip. Yeah.
Everybody I know that is morbidly obese is alone.
Remember Kathy from Nebraska? She and I talked a lot about the loneliness of her own life dealing with obesity.
It's isolating. They prefer to be alone. They hide in their homes. They don't go out for many, many reasons. It's physically miserable to do it. It is socially miserable to do it. And you're so ashamed, you don't think you deserve it.
I wonder if those feelings and habits from being obese ever leave you. How hard they are to shake. And if Richard, the fat teenager, and all the habits that go along with that, I wonder if that's the Richard in charge right now.
If I had a conversation with him right now, I would say, quit isolating, find the people, seek out people that you trust. It's horribly lonely, and you kind of start getting a little crazy, and you start getting inside of your own head. And it's a really tough thing. The longer you stay in isolation, the harder it is to get out of it, because the world goes on without you.
Yeah. And yet I feel like I understand part of what you're saying. There's something about that isolation that's so appealing. It's so attractive.
Well, you don't get challenged. You don't get any surprises. You have no responsibility. Every day is the same. I mean, you don't think about all you're missing out on because you don't see it.
That's it.
That's beautiful. Your
lost-
empathy is really sweet.
Thank you. She lost 400 pounds with Richard over the phone. They would talk every week, and then he disappeared. And so it was just I was talking to her to sort of, if I was just approaching it as just a story, like she would be the person who she illustrates, all the people who miss Richard, and that would be it. But in fact, she really by talking about the mindset of obesity and not being able to leave your home, she really sort of elucidated all these potential motivations for what would make Richard do something like that. And also, it's also a great example of an interview that never would have worked if it was filmed, because she had gained all the weight back and then some, and so she didn't want to be seen. And so it was we did it on the phone. It was a phone interview, and if you listen to it again, which we won't, it sounds like it. It sounds like two people talk. After a while, we were just kind of talking. Like there were really huge gaps in the conversation, and just sort of like when you were 16 talking to somebody on the phone, like forever. And it's something beautiful that I really learned to love about audio documentary making.
That's beautiful. And I just have to ask a quick technical question. Did you send her a recorder, or were you able to record the phone that way?
No, we would send you send a producer, and the producer will hold the microphone up in front of her. But it's incredible how, these microphones are small. You just don't, you really lose track of the person there. And because she wasn't worried about how she was physically presenting, I think that just allowed her to be more open.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because like in documentary, one thing we've talked about over the years, as the cameras have gotten smaller, people have said, oh, it's great because it allows for more and more intimate recording.
Sure.
And audio is which has been around. Actually, audio was first.
It seems like it wasn't, though,
right.
doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Is the ultimate intimate thing. That's really fabulous. So before we go on, I just want to get a sense of who's here and sort of the general kinds of things you're interested in, so I can guide the conversation towards things that you guys are interested in. So if you want to just shout out, they don't have to be specific questions. I'm just curious, like, what are some general things you're interested in? Yeah. Funding, yeah. How do you find your audience? Yeah, yeah. Money in and audience out. Yeah. IP and business plans. Okay. Yeah. What else? Yeah. Oh, okay. Right. Who makes the cover art? Yeah. Right on. Uh huh. Right. So, what's the budget for the podcast? And do you have any other experience in sort of working in both, or at least thinking in both? How would this be as a visual story? How would this be as an audio story? Yeah. A couple more? Right. What's your writing process? How do you structure? What order do you do the different steps? Yeah. One last one. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. The same question we always have in documentary film too, if it's a one-off. So what happens to one-offs? What if you don't have a whole series idea? Do you seek out a series like something to fit in? Like on television, we might do POV or something. How do you do? What are the options there in documentary? So first of all, the cover art seems to be a nod to Magritte.
It is. Thank you for noticing. And you'll see that the other seasons and the other clips we play, each season is a different play on a Magritte painting. Yeah. I don't know. That's for all the Magritte fans out there. A little Easter egg. It was just that when Topic Studios had funded the project, that was one of the concepts they came up with, and I just loved it immediately. I wanted to, one of the dangers of doing a story like the one about Richard Simmons is that if I hadn't been known Richard, and if we hadn't been already talking about making a documentary, and if I hadn't been taking his class for over a year, and I was just an outsider coming in on talking this and telling this story, it could so easily have been TMZ. I mean, it's just like, I'm interested in celebrities, and I want to know why celebrities don't want to, you know what I mean? It could have been really, so I wanted to go high. I wanted to just have references that were outside of that world. And so the fact that it was referencing a painting, even if people didn't pick it up, I thought it might sort of subliminally stick in there. And also, like, I didn't, there was a point where we were talking about why Richard Simmons did what he did, but in reality, it was really a story of the people that he had left behind, right? And so we tell all their stories. And so I didn't want it to be his face. I didn't want to show his, I just thought it was more effective to have the sort of memory of what the hair and the things you might remember without actually his face.
Yeah, that's very cool, very cool. Tell you what, I want to play the next clip, and then so we can talk about, for instance, the writing structure or those kind of questions, both into comparison, because your second series is called Y2K?
Surviving Y2K.
Surviving Y2K. Here, this is a story about a single person, I mean a whole community, but around a single person. And this, how is Y2K different? And do you want to set up the clip?
Oh, right. So basically, Surviving Y2K is another 6-episode podcast. The concept there was to tell the story of the millennium, stories from 1999, December 31st, and how, which most people don't remember, is now basically a joke. That there was a whole contingent of the world that thought the world was going to end at midnight.
Raise your hand if you remember Y2K. Okay.
Yeah.
You got to check out this.
It's a joke,
Serious.
right? It's stupid, and it didn't happen. And then the next day, everybody stopped talking about it. But we spent $500 billion mitigating the Y2K bug. And so the question
That wasn't the budget of the podcast.
That was not the budget of the podcast. But globally, that's what was spent in a huge public and private partnership. And so the question that I wanted to answer, I was interested in, is just the general, like, was the bug real or not? Was it a scam, or did we save the world? But the other thing, more emotional mystery for me, was what happens when you think the world is going to end and it doesn't. And so basically the podcast in 6 episodes tells chronologically the story of about 14 people, each with a different take on what they were doing at midnight on December 31st. And so what happened in the lead up to New Year's Eve and afterwards. And one of those stories is my story, because the kicker here is that January 1st, the year 2000, was probably the biggest day of my life, because of some personal decisions that I had made, and I tell that story as well. So it's all wrapped up in that. I thought the world was going to end as well. And so in terms of the clip, each episode, so the episodes there's 6 of them. It was Millennium Approaches, 1999, December, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, New Millennium. It was told chronologically. And this is a clip from episode 4, New Year's Eve. And it's a story of a bank robbery that happened because the banks had stocked up all this cash because they thought there was going to be a run in the bank because people thought that the world was going to end. And this woman decides to rob a bank. And it's a terrible idea. And so basically, this is the end of the episode. And this is the part where the woman, and the beauty of this is that, which we later found out, I didn't know this when we were doing the interviews, I didn't find out till afterwards, the FBI had recorded all the hostage negotiation calls with the bank robber on the phone. And so we had them all. And so it's a woman, her name's Nikki, she's the bank robber, and she's on the phone with her boyfriend, Sean, and Sean is trying to convince her to come out of the bank. It's just after midnight now. There's 3 hostages left. She has to decide what she's going to do with those 3 hostages. There's about 3 minutes left in the episode.
Why don't you just turn yourself in?
You don't realize how much deep shit I'm in.
No, Nikki, I realize that, but you know what? You haven't done anything wrong yet. You know, you haven't hurt anybody.
Nah.
All right, you screwed up and wasn't a smart thing to do, but it's not the end of the world, Nikki. It's not that bad. It's not as bad as it seems, believe me.
Yeah, right. I'm serious. I don't know. It's,
They're concerned because there's guns in there. They know there's 2 guns in there.
There's 1. Guys, how many guns in here?
gun.
Hold on.
Tell them all they can leave right now.
No. Becky's going. Becky, do you want to go? Becky? Becky? Becky, go. Go. Becky's going. Hold on. Becky, go!
At that point, she told me to grab my purse and leave the building, so I grabbed my purse and left.
That leaves just 2 hostages left, John Ann and Ron. And Nikki, the bank robber. Nikki, the now very angry bank robber.
Now I'm down to 2, so FBI, bite my ass and get your ass down here, Sean. And do not piss me off. You are the only one that I'm going to talk to. And if the FBI don't like it, kiss my fucking ass. Get your ass down here, Sean. So this can be all over with.
I want it to be over with. That's all I want, you know? I want you to be safe, and I want to see you again. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Nikki.
Well, it's going to be kind of hard while I'm in jail.
Next time on Surviving Y2K, New Year's Day.
Hi, is this Ron?
Yes.
Ron, this is Nancy. I'm with the police department.
Okay.
How are you?
Everyone say hi to Nancy. Nancy is the lucky bastard who gets to bring this hostage crisis to a close. And Nikki, she does not make it easy.
Well, then I guess it's going to be a while. Okay, until I talk to Sean. That's it.
Nikki,
Bye.
Nikki, don't hang up. Don't hang up.
But it does end, eventually. And not the easy way.
Ron, are you there? John Ann, what's going on? John Ann, is anybody there? Is anybody there? Somebody pick up the phone.
That's it. Amazing. I defy you to not listen to the next episode. Which is something I learned in making this, in making 6 episodes versus 1, feature length doc, or is just each episode is to just never end on an ending, always end on a beginning. There's a tendency to want to make each episode of a podcast, a documentary podcast, like a little beautiful thing that you can just sit with the feelings at the end when it's over. And have it be self-contained. And I just think that what you really want to do is just make people, is to do that, have those feelings, but you just have to create the imperative that people need to keep listening. And so hopefully that did that.
And so I was telling Dan earlier when I hadn't heard this series, so I started listening to it. I wanted to prepare for it today. And I was like, I don't know if I'll have time to get through this whole podcast, but let me start listening. And right from the very first episode, you get a tease like that at the end, cliffhanger, and I'm just hitting the fast forward button so that the podcast player automatically jumps. I'm binging. Hit me the next episode. It's also, by the way, someone was talking about writing. It's a good rule for writing. I must say, that that notion. Even though in a film you don't have commercial breaks, but still, you could have moments like this. Don't let a scene end on a.
Yeah.
Don't let it resolve.
Yeah. Don't give somebody an excuse to just be like, well, that's enough. Yeah. If somebody gives me an excuse to, in anything, a film or a TV show, I'm like, I get it. Like, that's self-contained. I will literally turn it off because my attention is so pulled to my fucking phone or anything else. And so it really helps to make it impossible.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask, interesting because I like the question about how do you structure, what's your process for writing? Because writing is the root of all good or evil, depending on how well the writing is done. And I want to point to something that this particular clip is a great example of. There are so many emotions happening at once. Your voice and your narration is conveying one kind of emotion. It's interesting. It was the second telephone call. This is another telephone call. That has its own thing. The sound of that telephone call has a thing, and the music has another. So there's these different, and each of them has like a different emotion. So going all the way back to the beginning, before you have these things wedded together, how did you structure this? How much for instance, preparation did you do before you started recording the stories?
Interviews?
And how much structuring do you do after you've recorded?
I do many. For the last podcast I did, Running from Cops, I did over 100 interviews recorded, just recorded. And that doesn't include the ones where I was just talking to people. So I do a lot of interviews. I start right away because there's just the process for me is not to tell a story. I'm not a storyteller. I'm not trying to tell the listener a story. I'm trying to ask a question. And with each episode, the answer to that question should get more and more complicated.
Interesting.
I'm trying to tell a really complicated story. And so that by the end, I don't know where I land, but I feel like I've thought about it enough that I've gotten as close as I possibly can. So I'm not trying to say, school choice is the reason why is the thing that's going to save education. Like if you start a documentary like that, a podcast or a film, that's it. You already told me what the story is. But I want to be asking questions. So it's very open ended. The writing process takes months. I started recording interviews with this in January. I started writing in April, and it aired in November. And I was writing right up until the end. So the writing process takes a very long time. It's more like writing a magazine piece. And you have very long edit sessions where people listen to your work for hours and then pick it apart, which is really helpful. All the transcripts are done. I don't know. Is anybody doing these like Trint? Does anybody do Trint? Right? It's incredible, right? Trint, Trint,
transcribing service.
Yeah, it's a transcribing service, and you get the transcript, and then wherever you put the mouse, you click on the transcript, it plays the audio back for you. And then you select it, and it will just play that piece. It's exactly what you've been wanting. You want the computer to listen to your freaking brain, and it does it now. Yeah. And so I write with that, and I write. It takes a long time to write. I write in columns. Structure is very elaborate. I have a lot of flowcharts because I spend a lot of time in episode 1. It's all set up, and then I pay it off one by one until episode 6. That's the goal. I write in a column because I'm not writing for print. I'm writing for spoken word, and it's a little bit. I would never say this in public, but this isn't really public. It's more like poetry. So I want to see. I want it to look like not a haiku, but I want to see the length, the block. It's a visual process of there's blocks, and you can see how long the blocks are for each part of your story, and that is what helps me with rhythm.
Now I have to ask, why would you not say it's poetry in public? I was ready for something,
Oh, really?
Why
would I? I don't know, man. It's hard enough to take the time and just call yourself an artist, right? But to call yourself a poet?
You are.
Yeah.
Editing is writing is poetry.
Yeah, but that's how I approach it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? But structure is everything. Everything. The more complicated, the better. People say people want simple stories. I don't believe it, not for a second.
Interesting. But you don't begin complicated.
No, you got to start super easy. Here's the simplest thing in the world. Richard Simmons, look at his hair. Look at his short shorts. Isn't he hilarious?
Right.
But then what about this? But then what about this? And I think I know the answer, but then this interview, this guy said this, and he said I should go talk to this person. And then what about this whole thing? And then when you learn his history, that he was a fat kid himself, and that he was going to be a priest, and that he had this religious zeal to cure people of obesity, and then he just stopped in a day, how is that possible? And then you figure out oh, there's all these people in his life who were doing things to limit his access to the public before he disappeared. How does that fit into this? And then you start talking to people, and they show you the public forums on the internet where he was talking to people about how dark he felt inside, and about his depression. And he was saying it publicly, but nobody was paying attention because he's just Richard Simmons, a short shorts guy. What about that? And it's about starting super simple, and by the end, it's so complicated. All you can feel is empathy for just him and the human condition, and the people he left behind, and there are no answers. I don't want to leave people with answers.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And to be clear, when you say it's complicated, I think that could be in lesser hands that could be taken the wrong way or used the wrong way, right? It's when you say complicated, really, you can say more to this, but I feel like really what it is we're sort of like unsure how we should feel about somebody.
Yeah, I think
over and over.
It's complexity, but it's also I want people to feel like I'm in control. Like I want people to be listening, and it'll be like I'm going to tell you this really fucked up, complicated story, and I don't want people to think that I know what I think before I start it, because I don't. I open it. I don't know what I think, and even if I think I do know what I think, I really put that down, because you don't know. You don't freaking know until you talk to the 100 people who know more than you do about this thing. But I want people to, and I want people to see that process. But I want people to see the complexity. But I want them to feel like I'm doing that thing where I'm blindfolding them, and they have total trust that I'm not going to push them over a cliff. But like I'm going to put their hand in the weird thing that feels disgusting, and they're like, oh, it's just pasta, or like it's sort of like I want them to trust me to blindfold them, and that I will lead them on a sort of beautiful journey. Yeah.
Yeah, right on. You're a poet, Matt. It's happening.
Fucking poetry.
So this is a poetry jam. Yeah. That is, by the way, a perfect setup for the next clip from Cops, talking about not knowing how you feel about something or approaching it with an open mind. So
Yeah.
tell us.
Okay, so the third series is called Running from Cops. It's an exploration into the show Cops that's just been on for 30 years. I've seen probably 500 episodes of the show. I used to watch it. I used to watch it all the time, a couple episodes a day. It's on 15, 20 times a day. And I knew it was fucked up. It was an exploration as to what police participating in an entertainment show was doing to the way that we understood policing in this country. There was a lot of pressure by the people I was working with, and on myself a little bit. When you're talking about something, I'm a white guy, talking about policing, which has a lot of serious real life implications for people. So there's a lot of pressure to lay out immediately how you feel about this, because you want people to know that you're on the right side or the wrong side. Because everybody has an opinion about this, right? And if you think that somebody's not in line with you at all, you just don't even want to freaking listen to it. I really had to resist that impulse to lay out how I felt about it, because that's Twitter. Like if people want to tweet out their feelings, but there's a tension in the openness in approaching interviews. If you approach interviews with people who you might not like, there's a tension in that openness that I think is really important for a documentary. And so this interview is with the guy who created Cops, and people wanted me to go after him right away. But what I did was I spent most of the first episode just talking about the creation of the show, where it came from, talking to him like a Hollywood guy who created this sort of juggernaut, without putting too much emphasis on how I might feel about policing and maybe what the show is doing to our images of policing. And then this clip is from the end of that interview, where I finally press him a little bit, and the tension that comes from that.
Right on. Running from Cops.
How did it feel to be on the side of the police? Did you have mixed feelings about potentially not showing the other point of view, which may make you see police in a different way?
I was never conflicted, and I never thought that police and police brutality was a big issue in my life. I never really saw that. I mean, it's a theme that you have.
Is it?
Yeah, it's the second time you've asked. Like, the truth is, nothing that these cops did suggested to me that they were wrong in any sense. I mean, they were getting drug dealers and domestic disputes and stuff. So I thought they were doing their job, but no, I didn't have any conflict thinking I'm on the other side or something. No, that wasn't my conflict. No. See, here's the other thing, which is like, okay, you have all these kind of, I don't know, pinko liberal, kind of view of police departments or whatever. It's like, Cops Russia was the saddest.
They went and shot a couple episodes of Cops in Russia that first season.
You go work in some other country and you see how cops are over there, and it's like, it's pretty responsible over here.
So your answer to criticizing the police is, well, we're not Russia.
Yeah, it's like, you got it good in this country. I have no complaints, so you can pursue whatever you want. I personally haven't seen enough to get upset. Cops is just what it is. It's you can't question it. It is what it is.
I can question it.
Well, of course you do. It's now the third time. You can over-intellectualize it, but you shouldn't. I mean, you can attach bias to it, but that's kind of in your head. I mean, mostly.
I love the generous music.
Yeah, the
after
composer,
this complicated discussion too.
Yeah, the composer we use did the last 2 seasons is the guy who did Nebraska, the movie Nebraska.
Oh yeah, great.
And so he composes it from soup to nuts. Yeah,
Interesting. So fascinating example here of it's unusual. It's not unheard of, but it's unusual in podcasting and maybe even more so in film to have moments where the filmmaker or reporter or storyteller is being pushed back on. A lot of times that usually doesn't make it into the final piece. Yeah. And in here, it's like, not only is it dead on, it's like he's really talking to you and you let that go. It wasn't some sort of flippant remark. You left that in as an important part of the story. Did you wrestle with that at all, or were you like, this is awesome?
No, I thought it was awesome. He walked out after that.
He did.
Yeah. I loved it because it was open. It was really. I was being really honest. Like we had talked for an hour about the show Cops that he had created. And it was like he came out. It was more interesting for me it was more interesting to watch the cognitive dissonance in his head between what he had made for 30 years versus what it actually might mean. That was much more interesting than me just telling him you're a bad guy. You don't see, like, the openness to me is just the most effective tool I have, and it's not a gimmick. It's a real approach, and I just feel like it just allows me to have really honest interactions with people, but there's a tension to it, and if you can be comfortable with that tension, but it's easier to do that than it is to confront people. I've been in confrontational interviews where you're going there just to confront somebody, and it feels like shit, and everybody feels gross, and it never turns out like you think because you're holier than thou, and this is it feels honest to do, and hopefully it plays that way.
Tell us about one of those confrontational.
Oh my God! Well, that was more at the Daily Show.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, I was a producer of the Daily Show for a while, so that. But I just think that's what people. That's where dialogue is right now publicly, and it's hard to push back against that. But if you're going to talk in what turns out to be 4.5 hours, not about policing, but about cultural portrayals of policing and how that affects our understanding of what police can and cannot do. I spent 4.5 hours talking about that. If you're going to have your opinion solidified in the first 5 minutes, like whether people understand it or not, nobody's going to listen to the whole thing. There's no point.
Yeah, and this series is all 3 of your series are interesting in that they all do this in a different way, but they're about different topics. This is the one sort of most, overtly you want to come to a decision about this, or understand what's going on. And we should make it clear, too, the entire series is not from that guy's point of view. For instance, we then have conversations with cops. You then have conversations with people who were arrested and who are forced to see their episode played over and over and over again for all these years. Yeah. Did your feelings change throughout the making of that? First of all, how long were you working on that? Did your feelings change, or would you say more it was just that your knowledge increased throughout.
No, my feelings changed.
They did.
Yeah. Not changed, but they. I thought I was going to. I didn't realize, as somebody who had watched Cops as background noise, just like I watch like QVC as background noise, it's just how I grew up, and so it's not like I was sitting there watching Cops. But I didn't realize how much of what they showed on Cops is actually illegal policing presented as legal policing. It's actually unconstitutional policing, and they present it as job well done, constantly, at least one an episode. I didn't know it. I didn't know that, and so. I juxtapose that, and so that was a revelation for me. I knew that there were bad things going on, but we watched and cataloged 865 episodes of the show, and did a huge data analysis just to talk about how it portrayed race and class and different types of crime and all that stuff. And so I, doing that sort of analytical dive, you just get. That's why I did it. I didn't do it to tell the story of Cops. I did it because I had a question, and somebody would give me a little bit of money to spend a year and a half asking that question over and over.
A year and a half. It's amazing.
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah.
So it changed a lot. And and I also I see police as working class people who take jobs that don't pay a lot of money because they don't have a lot of opportunities, and there's 100,000 in this country. And I think the idea that all cops are bad. I grew up with people who became cops. All cops are not bad. They're part of a bad system. And so I was wrestling with that dynamic as well. But how do you talk about police without hanging each and every one of them?
Yeah, and the show's been on so long. I think you talk about in the series, right, that there are guys who are cops now who grew up watching Cops.
Yeah, there are cops. I mean, I have a playlist at home that's literally just clips of cops saying, "Yeah, I became a cop because I watched Cops." And so people are watching Cops, and they're learning how to become a cop because they're watching that show. And then when you realize that what they're showing in that show is not legal, and that these cops are doing that, and when you're on a reality show, everybody knows that the minute you're on a reality show, you start acting like you think you're supposed to act. You start acting like a dumb housewife. You start acting like a duck hunter. You start acting like a cop. Yeah. And so it's this really fucked up feedback loop.
Yeah, or even worse, maybe you start acting like we'll get you on TV.
Yeah,
and all that. Here's an interesting question: Richard Simmons is not. I don't want to say it's a simplistic story, and like you said, it becomes more complicated as you go on, because each person in his community, and it's a large community of people who care for him, has a different point of view. But here, this is like really now a big sort of social observation, if not critique. Is this two things? One, is this where you do you feel that as you make more and more of these podcasts, you are expanding in this direction or taking on bigger things? And different but creative question: how do you keep people riveted through something that is that much? If I there's a lot of documentaries we could watch which are an examination of policing in America, and you get all these different point of views, but it's a little bit dry. This series plays like a riveting narrative all the way through. Yeah.
So what's the question?
So do that one first. How do you keep people?
How is it so good?
How do you keep people? Yeah. How do you keep people riveted when you are this particular scene we're talking about? Is this good? Is this bad? And yet it plays like drama.
I think it's about never answering the question. I until the very last minute. In episode 1, we set up the fact that we go to Spokane, Washington. We set up the fact that we were going to Spokane, Washington. It starts with a vote at City Council about whether or not to kick cops out of Spokane. We don't reveal what the vote is until episode 4. But now there's this thing in their head that this is going to happen, and it's important because City Council of a major city is taking this up. We reveal the fact that we have watched 865 episodes of the show and done a deep dive statistical analysis that nobody's ever done before, but I'm not going to tell you the results of that until episode 3. we reveal, we introduce you to the characters of these two teenagers who were arrested for possession of cocaine in Gwinnett County, Georgia, in the first episode, and we reveal that. In that first episode, we reveal that, that test, that roadside drug test that they did that showed it was positive for cocaine. It turns out when they did the state test, it was negative for cocaine, but they still aired that episode anyway. But we don't tell you that. But then we say, but that's just the fucking beginning, because we found the raw video of that cops footage. So now we know not just the 7 minutes that they put on that show. We know what those police and those producers did for the hour and a half that they were shooting video. But I'm not going to tell you what that was until episode 6. And so there's all these open-ended things that you keep sort of alluding to and that have different levels of interest. Some are analytical, some are sort of characters. You want to know what happened to the characters. And some are just like, here's the investigative shit that we found. All different sort of types of open ends, and then laying them out as you go along. Just not giving people need an answer. If they got all the answers right away, they're not going to keep listening.
Yeah, so that's a good, when you talked about like your flow charts and how you have things integrated. This is what you were talking about, that you have items, and so it's interesting. You basically answered both my questions, which is like that's how you keep people listening. Is you have something you know exists and the viewers don't know is there, and you can tease it.
Yes, and not even in an authentic way. Like, for example, that video, that hour and a half of video from cops, which we found, which we never could have thought we were going to find. We actually did find that at the very end of our reporting, and so it did change everything that we believed. Because basically, what you find out when you see that is a very high likelihood that those police officers planted evidence on those kids, and that the producers or cops knew about it, and so it changed everything, and I wanted people to. So it wasn't this artificial thing of like, I'm not going to tell you, even though I've known this whole time. I wanted it mirrored my process of figuring out, of answering this question, and I wanted people to experience that with me, which I think is the goal of a long form nonfiction narrative like this, at least the way I do it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that keeps us riveted to any story is we get to be in the privileged position. You bring us with you, and so you do that very well. How did you know how many episodes there would be, for each of the series? How does that come about? How many episodes it will be? And is a business decision part of that? Is that affected by how many ads they want to sell or whatever?
Yeah, so you need a certain amount of episodes. You need enough that people that can sort of catch on. But this isn't the type of podcast. This isn't like Joe Rogan's podcast where there's one every day and you're selling ads against this and you're just making money hand over fist. You need to make this meaty enough so that you can put a couple episodes out there and that people can catch on and start listening and then experience the last few episodes coming out as it's happening, right? So it feels like you're part of something. That's the idea. There are actually 8 episodes for each, but 2 are bonus episodes, but you can still sell ads on those bonus episodes. The bonus episodes are much easier to do. It's like a long form interview that I just didn't have time I couldn't fit into the thing, or like you can knock it out. And it's important that some of those are they're for like the super fans. But you can still sell ads against it.
But to be clear, some podcasts have a subscription model where only the subscribers get the bonus.
Yes,
but yours are
both. There were bonus episodes available earlier on Stitcher, which was the platform that was selling them. But the bonus episodes then came out on Apple later. And 6 episodes is just what I feel is it's for me. It's like the 90 minutes. It's where I landed. It's where I landed, and I do think that there's a logic to that. Like, if you break a 90-minute film down, 15 minutes is sort of like a sequence, right? Like, it's kind of like there's only so many evolutions you can go through in a story where you want it to start wrapping up, and I always it just feels right to me. It's just that 6 is the right number. Like, by the time you hit the beginning of 5, you're like, you need to start telling people how this is going to end, and then it's just the number that always felt right to me. And I think that bears out there are some podcasts that they'll do 12 or 15 because they want to monetize. And there aren't many podcasts that I've listened to that are that long where I'll keep going because I just don't think there's enough.
Interesting. And each episode, these episodes are about just under an hour or 45 minutes.
Like 40 minutes, 45, which is longer than it needs to be. Some people, 25 minutes, 30 minutes is a good number. It's probably longer than it needs to be, but it's just what happens.
Right. Well, I like your attitude too, which is a good lesson for people. Is that people always think if you're making something, oh, it should be long, right? More minutes means it's better. And you're pointing out, no, we should go by golf scores and not by baseball scores.
Yeah. Oh, even if I'm riveted, even if I'm watching like the best movie I've ever seen, like I'm looking at my watch, I still want to know. I can't. And so
Tough crowd.
What?
Tough crowd.
Yeah. I just want to know. I want to know where I am in the story. I want to know, and so yeah, that helps me.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. All right, let's take some questions. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you are not cheap. What is your budget?
You're not.
Yeah. Budgets are. I want to give you a number. Budget without giving you specific numbers. Budgets for something that I do, I would say 300,000 for each season, which is a lot for a podcast.
And just as reference for what would you consider a budget for when you said like a 90-minute like independent documentary?
I mean,
but a really good one. Yeah.
I mean, low end is 750, but it's gonna. I think it's gonna get higher than that.
Right. So a podcast is about half the budget.
Yeah.
Of a film.
Yeah.
But because it's audio, it feels comfortable. 400,000, let's say.
If it's, I'm the worst businessman. Let me just preface by saying this. So I'm the worst. I've never asked to travel. I've never asked to do an interview. I've never asked for more time and had anybody say no to me. And so those budgets are enough. That is what I know. I also know that I'm not getting paid that much money to do them. And I also know that I am paying a huge amount in time. I spend an enormous amount of time on these. Just like all you people are. Like that's what everybody's doing, right? You're making these things because they touch you and you want to, and that's the gift, right? But there is an element where it is also a cost. Like I'm begging people to let me do that, but when they do let me do that, it is a huge time suck. And so that's part of the trade-off. So I can do both of this. I can watch
and spending money and
I may actually do a series about Home Shopping Network, and if I do, yeah.
So the question is, if you were to do fiction, or if audio fiction becomes more popular, might the budgets be going up, or do you think they're going to stay at this level for a while?
I don't understand why audio fiction has to be more than that.
Yeah,
because you're paying for the voices. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But theoretically, if the budget is, if you have a budget to pay like a big actor, that would mean that the show is likely to bring in a lot more. I mean, that budget would be, no one's going to go into debt on that.
I don't know a lot about fiction. It's not the part of fiction, audio fiction. It doesn't appeal to me, and it just doesn't grab me. I will say that my experience is that the people, in terms of the companies that I'm talking to, the people who will give money to make stuff, they're making. This is really broad statement, so whatever. They're making fiction podcasts because they want to make fiction movies from that podcast and fiction series. Yeah, it's all IP. Like nobody, and I'm just not. Yeah.
Yeah. Right here? gerund. So do you have a home for each series, or are you finding yourself having to find a buyer for each one separately?
This was all done with Pineapple Street and with Topic Studios. They were the team that made Missing Richard Simmons, and Missing Richard Simmons was an unexpected success, and so unexpected by me most of all, and so it was just one of those things where after Missing Richard Simmons was made, it was like, well, we'll make some more just to see if this is going to happen again. And so that was all the same team. Now that I'm done with this, and probably done, I'm not sure if I'm done with Headlong. I'm not sure if the next one I do will be under the Headlong rubric, but the possibilities are opening up where there's other people that I'm talking to about making the podcast. And it's a question. I'm in the process of deciding now, trying to figure out if it's going to be a home where it's like an overall deal where they make all the stuff, or if actually it's a better system to sell them project by project because they're different. It depends. Yeah, it all depends on the projects that one wants to make.
Right. Studio system versus fully independent.
Yeah.
Can you say how big the audiences are? What counts as like great success?
Yeah, this is a terrible thing. I don't really know too much. I don't want to know. My producer Henry knows, and he'll tell me when we hit certain milestones. I think we hit 15 million a while ago. So I don't know where they are. I don't know. So it's a lot because of what happened with Missing Richard Simmons. It was sort of a huge kickstart to just getting people to listen to it. But I can't tell you episode by episode. Sorry.
Just compared. Again, I always say compared to television, it's incredible to me because like this is much. If a television show got 15 million,
but I will also say it sounds ignorant that I don't know, but I will also say it's a conscious choice I'm trying to make in that I do think there's a difference between, and I worked in television for 20 years, and there's a difference between making what you want to make, and the minute you start asking, at least for me, the minute I get too involved in numbers, then it becomes trying to make what other people want to hear, and it's a very different thing. And I feel like I'm in this privileged position right now, because of Missing Richard Simmons. It was a fluke, but I'm here, and so I just want to keep making what I want to make and let other people figure out how to force people to listen to that.
I would also say it's not a fluke. It was, it's great, it's great
right.
storytelling. I mean,
Right,
anyone
right.
could have made that. And
Thank you.
And yeah.
Yeah.
How big is the production team?
Producer, in all these was Henry Malofsky, which is the two key people. It's a true collaboration. A really important relationship, creative relationship for me. So there's him. I usually have another producer who's usually more focused on investigative work and booking, like tracking down weird people. I have an associate producer. I have an editor who reads all the work and is somebody who gives me advice and tells me what I'm doing is wrong and really helps really helps me lean away from my worst impulses. And then there's a composer and a sound mixer and a fact checker, stuff like that.
And are all those people in-house at Pineapple, or each freelance?
All those people are in-house, but no, half of them are freelance. Okay. Like the producers, one of my producers is usually freelance. Because the thing about these is that it takes a long time to make, but the great thing about podcasting is you can start making it without being in production. Mm-hmm. So when you're making a film, once you're in production, like you're fucked because you got like a line producer, like you got to go. Like there's no, and so this you can start research and you're kind of in production, and Henry will put a microphone in front of me and we're kind of recording and like, and so it takes a while. And so sometimes you want people. I was just staffing up another project and I was like, I don't want a full-time person, even though I was who turns down money. But if there's a full-time person, then there's pressure for that person to be producing. But sometimes it takes 3 months to convince that one person. and that person can be doing other things with their time
Right.
instead of taking it out of my budget.
Right. Here's a quick question I have out of curiosity. When you're narrating,
Yeah.
it's interesting because you don't talk like listening to you talk here is different than listening to than when you're narrating. Yeah, when you're narrating, it feels like you're really like in the moment and meditating about the subject or something. I mean, when you record your narration, do you do any preparation, or is it that's just how you are when you put a microphone on and start talking? And are you talking to yourself alone in a room, or are you
No,
looking?
I'm talking to Henry. I'm talking to my producer.
Interesting.
Even
though in this show it might sound like you're just talking to us. Henry's
But it's like I'm trying to explain what happened, and so I'll when I'm doing this very often, I'll be looking at my producer in the eye and saying. Interesting. And so now we're left with two hostages, John Ann and Ron and Nikki, the bank robber. I'm telling him what this is the next part of the story. I don't do a lot of takes. I try to keep it as natural as possible. There are certain times where, for example, in Surviving Y2K, I basically tell the story of the day that I walked out on my wife, which is a very fraught story, which has a lot of shame involved. And that is more, not performance, but I'm aware that I'm trying to access a certain thing. And so that's a little harder. That I need to sort of think for a while. And actually, in Surviving Y2K, we were down to the wire, and I still had to record that part. I was putting it off because it's so emotional. And my producer, Henry, and I was having trouble. I kept saying, I just need a little more time. And he brought his girlfriend into the recording booth and he wanted me to tell her. I was like, go fuck yourself. It's a great idea. And it worked, because it was like I had to tell this person I didn't know the most shameful story of my life. And so that's when you hear that, when you hear the episode 6 where I tell that story, that it's one take and it's me telling her that story.
One question, please.
Make it a good one.
So the question was, how do you get an audience? And because each series feels like it may have a totally different audience, are you conscious at all about bringing the audience from the previous show into the new one?
Yeah, I mean, the original idea was that in podcasting, what people hang on to is the feed. The feed is value because, so basically, I did Missing Richard Simmons, and all of a sudden we had millions of people who were on this feed, and that's value, right? Because if you put the next thing on, it's going to automatically be downloaded to a lot of their phones, and they're automatically going to listen, and that's how you get people to go along. And the idea was to put Headlong all on the same feed, right, and just continually grow that thing of value and have the audience built in. What actually happened for us is that we realized that the challenge with that, gosh, I hope I'm not saying too much. I don't care. The challenge with that is that with Missing Richard Simmons, it did so well in that the next one was never going to do as well, and because of that, it doesn't make a blip in the Apple iTunes ratings because your feed downloads hasn't changed enough in order for you to hit number one. And hitting number one is very important because that's what gets even newer audience members. And so what we ended up doing is breaking them down to new feeds every time. And that allowed us to hit number one each time.
Just to clarify, iTunes is based on the spike.
Yeah, it's like an algorithm, and you can't break if you keep everything in the same feed, it's hard to upset the algorithm. But if you, and so we ended up breaking up the feed, and to be honest, again, privileged position, but because of Missing Richard Simmons, people were interested in what I was going to want to do, what I was going to do next, and they were going to write about it. So there was enough people that were going to talk to me about it and maybe review the podcast. And that has been, I rely on that a lot. That I'm talking about things that people want to talk about and that might make an interesting thing for Vulture to write about or the Washington Post or whatever. And so that helps a lot.
Cool. I want everyone, please thank Dan for being so honest and open.
Thank you
and
so much.
interesting
I
today.
hope that was helpful at all.
Yeah, and thank you to. It was helpful to me, at least.
Good,
Was
good.
it helpful to you?
It's just me talking. So.
That's right. That's right. And thank you to Doc NYC and Amy and Emma and Tony back there. And there's a lot more stuff happening today, so stick around. It's the last day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.